Okay, so this session is about getting into that system, in particular after returning to Australia, and there's Australian things that people need to click into. So we've got two people on the panel, Philip Kaufman and Chelsea Tobin, which is a slight difference to what was on the original program. And I'll just let them introduce themselves briefly with just briefly your story of what type of surrogacy you did or what you've done.
Chelsea Tobin, we did domestic altruistic surrogacy in Victoria and have a 22-month-old.
We did surrogacy through the States, and we have twin 17-month-old twins at the moment.
Great, and I'm going to be a terrible moderator here and say I did surrogacy in Thailand, so in case I get tempted to jump into any of this stuff as well, that's my background. Okay, so did you have some? Do you want to just start with suggesting what? So there's lots of different things that you needed to organise. What were the most important ones to be organised about in advance? You know, was there any of them that you needed to organise before the birth or in advance?
For us, it was the passports. You can have the kids overseas, but to get them back into the country, that was the concern for us. So we had been to see a lawyer here just to find out the status, and then we engaged the services of an immigration lawyer. So an added complication for us was that my partner wasn't an Australian citizen at the time that we were going through surrogacy, and he only became a citizen 3 days before the kids were born. So we didn't know whether one child would get in as an Australian and the other not. So we just made sure that we had to be on top of every aspect with regards to passports.
Okay. Chelsea?
Look, I think it's different by state for altruistic surrogacy, but for Victoria, I mean, the thing you need to have beforehand is a patient review panel approval, which is your legal, your counselling, your medical. You have to have court approval to do it. So I think that's the only document that really matters. But then I think the other thing beforehand would just be the organisation with the hospital. How are they going to handle the surrogacy? What does the birth suite look like? What does the birth plan look like? Where do we both stay in the hospital? All that sort of stuff.
Okay, great. Let's go through some of the things that you might have to deal with: Medicare, Centrelink, things like that. And in particular, if there's anything that you had any difficulties with, or any additional materials you needed to provide. Let's start with Medicare. How did you find that?
So I think for altruistic surrogacy, because you go to court first, after the baby is born, there is a month before you can apply to have the substitute parentage order, and then you have to get a court date for that. You have to go to the county court. So you can't. When Matilda was born, we didn't have the surrogate mother, and my aunt was on the birth certificate, so I couldn't get a Medicare card for her. So I just for all of that stuff, I would just take a really practical approach and ask for forgiveness later, not for permission. That would be my guiding principle. So, for example, immunisations. I have a local GP. We went to him a couple of months before Matilda was born and said, hey, we're going to have a baby. It's going to be born a little bit differently. I really would like her to be immunised starting at 6 weeks, but I'm not going to have a Medicare card. And he said to me, listen, love, this is not complicated. I have divorced parents playing me off against each other. This is two parents that love their kid that want to get it immunised. I'll immunise your child, don't worry. So, I mean, I think just a little bit of what are the things I need to get done, what is a practical way to do it, get it done. And then what happened was once we got the substitute parentage order, I just held all my doctor's receipts, sent it in and got reimbursed, retrospectively. So I don't think you miss out on anything like that. Same with paid parental leave. My aunt got maternity leave for her to recover. She'd given birth. Rightly, she should have some time to recover for her body. And I got paid parental leave as a new parent. Did I particularly ask permission for that? Did I just assume that was my right? Yes. And I got it, and I don't think anybody's trying in the Australian system. Everybody wants to support surrogacy, just some of the auxiliary services aren't quite there yet. So tax, paid parental leave, some of the hospitals aren't quite there yet. So it's just I would just ask for forgiveness and not permission, and assume that as a parent or an intended parent or as a surrogate that you have a right to those things.
So our approach was slightly different. We got our kids before they were born onto our family insurance, so onto our private, the HCF, so we just got them on, and then we thought we would deal with Medicare when we got back. When we got back, we waited for them to get their Aussie passports first, and then we went across to Medicare, and it was just a matter of filling out the paper. No questions were asked, so we had no problem on that side.
The only difficult one to get for domestic surrogacy is a passport. So you can't have, well, you could get a passport. If we wanted to travel overseas before Matilda became a Tobin, she would have had to travel as Matilda X with a letter saying that she could travel with us. We had to wait until we had in a substitute parentage order, the old birth certificate just gets ripped up and a new one's issued in myself and Michael's name. But we couldn't apply for a passport until that happened. So things you need a birth certificate for, they are the problematic ones.
What about so you mentioned you had parental leave. What about the government's Centrelink provided?
Yes, I got that too. So I just sent in our substitute parentage orders. Yeah. I wrote a letter explaining it. I mean, nobody wants to take that stuff on. So, I mean, it was just approved straight away. I just wrote a letter saying, hey, I'm a new mum. My baby was born a bit differently. Here's the evidence of that. I expect payment. See you later. I mean, it's just...
What about you, Philip, with parental leave in particular?
So I was really lucky to get what everyone else got. So a normal, straight couple would get 3 months paid leave. So I got 3 months paid leave as a primary caregiver, and I could have taken an additional 9 months unpaid should I have wanted. So I took another 2, so I had 5 months off. So I had access to that as well.
And the government's paid parental leave scheme?
Yeah, so I resigned from my job, so I only had the government's paid parental leave, but my surrogate who works for the government, she got, or my aunt, she got parental leave through her workplace.
Have you had any issues with... I'm not sure if either of you have used childcare or any schooling at this stage. Your kids are too young for school, aren't they? Have either of you used childcare?
No.
And no?
Yeah, I have.
Any issues there?
She was a Tobin by the time she went to childcare, so there wasn't a naming issue. A little bit interesting when you fill up, because our daughter was donor egg and donor sperm, when you fill out medical histories. That'd be the only thing that I keep fairly handy is our donor's medical history, because Matilda got a rash the other day. The childcare called me about it. Is there eczema in the family? Because it was a chicken pox scared at the childcare centre. So I'm a bit useless to answer that. So I have to make sure. You just have to make sure with your donors that you have a pretty good medical history, or can ring them up if you need to, just for medical emergencies, I guess.
Okay, so should we go to questions, considering we don't have a huge amount of time?
What about accessing new mums groups when you...
So I just rang our council and said... so my aunt didn't want to do that. She had been a mum and I just rang the local council and said, hey, I'm going to be a new mum a little bit differently. Which mothers group can I join? And I just joined the Albert Park mothers group, and it was pretty. I was nervous before I went because I was wondering how it was going to be taken. Nobody ever asked me, did you give birth to the child that is yours? It's just everybody was so consumed in their own birthing stories. I mean, still to this day, 50% of them wouldn't know. I mean, it never came up. I wasn't trying to hide it. I mean, obviously I'm here. But yeah, I found it just quite irrelevant. We're all new mums, and I think how she came into the world sort of became a bit irrelevant once she was in the world in that forum.
What about you, Philip? Did you guys do anything?
Yeah, we registered. I think we were entitled to a home visit. And I think I went and took the kids in just so that I could get them registered. And I was then offered a survey, which was obviously for a mother, to ask me how I'm feeling and, am I dealing with postnatal depression and stuff like that, which you said that men do suffer from. So I thought a lot of the questions, they didn't really match the circumstance in which, our family came into being. So we never really bothered going back after that.
I would add, I think it's a little bit about the auxiliary services aren't really set up for surrogacy yet. So whether it's tax or whether it's the hospital or whether you fill out the medical history, they only ask about mums and dads. They don't ask about two dads, let alone donors. I just think the system isn't quite caught up with where surrogacy is at. The one thing I did find hard probably was the hospital. So the only private hospital in Geelong where Matilda was born is Catholic. They said no to us initially for religious beliefs. We had to petition to the minister. Eventually, a month before she was born, the Catholic private hospital would have us, which we had to have a private hospital under Victorian surrogacy law arrangements. So, and we had to have an obstetrician, couldn't have a midwife, all that sort of stuff. And then 16 meetings for them to be comfortable with how that was going to happen for us. And it was a terrific experience, but it was just, I guess you had to pioneer that again after everything else you'd had to sort of push. And so we had wards next to we had beds next to each other, and then after 2 nights my aunt said, I'm out of here, your kid's too noisy. So she went opposite, and it was terrific. But for example, I caught Matilda when she came out, and my aunt and her kids were all in the delivery suite. It was really terrific. But when my aunt went to have a shower and we went to move Matilda into the ward, they said, you can't take the baby. And there was probably about 10 of those type of instances where they weren't sure legally whether they're allowed to allow me to walk around the hospital with the baby. And they make you feel pretty shit because you're already feeling pretty shit because you're pretty barren. But it's just a little bit symptomatic of where the system is at, not really intent. So I think you have to look past the actions and go, everybody's trying to do something new here, just go with it. But the hospital is something I would really say, think about it, because it's a time of high emotion and it's delicate.
I think we have a question over there. A couple.
Chelsea, in relation to, you mentioned about the hospital, and you mentioned about private health insurance. So did Medicare kick in at any stage and cover anything at all for your aunt?
No, we covered all costs.
You had to absolutely cover everything. Yep. So whatever the gap was, you had to also cover that as well.
We didn't even go through her private insurance,
right.
Health insurance, just so that it wasn't a drain on her private health insurance or cover. So we just paid everything up front.
Okay.
For 2 people, so us and her.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Another question back there.
Just anecdotally, the private hospital in Canberra used to be a non-religious hospital and then got taken over by the Catholics. So we had real concerns about our program because we had nowhere else to go, basically, because the public hospital certainly would have been able to cope with it. Fortunately, we had a good CEO who took over the Catholic side, and he actually came to us and said, well, you can't do your egg collections in the hospital anymore, but I've found somewhere where you can. So he actually lined it up, and I said, well, now what about our IVF patients and our surrogacy patients for delivery? And he said, well, we don't agree with it, of course. He said, but once they're pregnant, and it's not the baby's fault, so we look after them. And I think he also had dollar signs in mind, but I think we were a bit luckier than you were in Geelong.
So one other thing I'd say is I even went to the classes you do at the hospital before the baby's born that show you all the SIDS rules. And I just went. I looked a bit weird, but I needed to know the SIDS rules. I needed to know what to do. So my husband and I just packed our bags and went to Geelong and turned up in one of the classes and it was really good. And I mean, people get their head around, but I think sometimes when people first find out information like that, it's a bit confronting, and sometimes people talk before they think, but then often they'll go away, think about it a bit more and come back. And so it's just see the bigger picture, not the sort of, just give people a bit of grace.
Just a couple of comments, if that's okay. Medicare have fixed their act up, from what I'm aware. You can apply for a Medicare card day one online, and it will be forwarded to you as a matter of norm for anyone else. Medicare only requires the person having the Medicare card is the person paying the bill rather than the legal parents. So they've sorted that out. And hospital-wise, thankfully most hospitals are now very much on board, but I really recommend, if you're going to a smaller hospital, probably 3 months into pregnancy, you are very officially inform the hospital that it's a surrogacy, so that they make sure that they update all of their procedures and whatever. And we use the Mater fairly regularly in Brisbane, and I just have to say they're much, much, much better than the state government hospital in dealing with our surrogacies, including rooms often for the intending parents if they're available.
Any further questions? One down the front here.
Philip, did your partner take any parental leave or subsidised leave?
No, we didn't. We just did. My employer paid for my time off, and we just decided that it wasn't really worth it for him to take time.
Perhaps you have time for one more question? No.
Right, I'll take that.
This is actually not a question, it's more of a update, because I've got a child that's now nearing adulthood, and I can assure you over 18 years the question of surrogacy has never come into any of the playing fields. He was enrolled in a Catholic school, in primary school. They were more interested in whether I was going to pay the account than how he was born. He has a tax file number. He now has his driver's licence. He's had passport renewals, and I have never ever had one question. So I just want to let everyone know that while some things initially can be a little daunting, I know Medicare, when we got home off the plane, we needed to take him to see a doctor straight away. And same reaction was the doctor said, let's deal with that later. Let's just make sure your child's okay. So whilst it might sound like there's a lot of issues, it can all be worked through.
Great, I think that's a good point to finish on. So thank Philip and Chelsea. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. That was great. Just a few final things. So that concludes the conference there. The winner of that prize draw for the family professional photography was Kelly Titchie. So go out to Ella and she's got the thing for you. For those of you who want to meet some of the parents and their kids, there is that catch up in the park, the north corner of Prince Alfred Park now, for the next 2 hours, if you want to chat to some of the parents who've been on journeys and have their kids aged between 2 months and probably about 6, 7, 8 years old. Please join them there. Well, good to meet you all.